Andy, Mbappé is back, but is it the same France national team that he was left out of that he's come back to?
In short, Dotun, no. And I guess it's worth reiterating how long he was away because, of course, he was passed over, at least partly with his agreement for the last couple of international meets in autumn. And it's a remarkable thing, really, if we think about it, just to go back to that for a second, that the current France captain, whilst fit, was left out of the last two squads. Now, what that meant is a lot of things changed in the meantime, because he was away for 6 months since he last played for France, the captain. I keep saying that, but it's still remarkable. So I'm going to have to keep saying it. And a couple of things changed in the meantime. If we're looking at France themselves, of course, they had a bit of a moment when they went to Milan and beat Italy in the San Siro with a new team that not many people expected really to be able to do anything. And they're really impressive, especially Manu Kone of Roma was very, very impressive in that game. And I guess it was a bit of shades of the 2022 World Cup, really, where they had a lot of injuries, a lot of other personnel issues. And Didier Deschamps, who's the most conservative of international coaches, was first forced to bring new blood and refresh his team almost by circumstance, really. And you could argue that happened and created the brightest moment for France's national team in quite a long time when they won that game in Italy. The second thing that's happened is the revival of PSG in the meantime. And we've talked about them a lot in recent weeks on the pod. And rightly so, because they've been the most eye-catching team in Europe. But of course, there has been the sort of Frenchification of the PSG team that Kylian Mbappé wanted and talked about and agitated for while he was there. And it's only sort of belatedly happened. It happened more since he's been away. They're a young, exciting team where the key players of the future are French. And you have to ask, Ryan, are they in a position where now Mbappé has to fit into Barcola and Ousmane Dembele's France team rather than the other way around?
I find it quite interesting that he's had to do the same thing at international level that he had to do at club level, basically, in the same season, where he's had to figure it out. And I find it quite interesting about Kylian Mbappé, where he, by memory, I think he did this when he went to PSG, albeit he was a lot younger, where he rarely goes in somewhere, either at international level or at club level, and will just alpha it up from the jump. You know, he takes a little bit of time. I think he's
suss his way around.
I think he's a lot more sensitive than maybe people give him credit for or not credit for, depending on which way you look at that. But if you look at, for example, Jude Bellingham going to Real Madrid, not wanting to go off the topic too much, but he was in a different category to Kylian Mbappé because he was a lot earlier on in his career and he'd come from somewhere like Dortmund, and it was very much like, no, this has been planned. I'm ready. But even he talked about how heavy that shirt is. And I think we saw that with Kylian Mbappé early on in the season at Real Madrid. And if you remember the first time he was left out of that international squad, what his season was looking like was completely different to what it is now. And I think that he needed maybe that extra time away from the international setup to adapt a little bit more at club level. And there was some stuff going on off the pitch as well that came out. And but I think returning now at a point where he is very much like his Real Madrid start is now not in question. You know, it's gone from being a complete, is actually this the right move? Is he going to be able to fit in around these players? To it being one of the most successful starts, I think, to a Real Madrid career in goal scoring, if not the most successful, I think, after Cristiano Ronaldo, or around the similar numbers. Coming back into that France setup now with this squad, I feel like, for me, it looks like you saw a slightly different Kylian Mbappé, someone who was taking a little bit more time to. I mean, you look at the penalties, when the missed penalties, for example, the way that he interacted with the players around that, I thought was it's not something I've seen him do before, and I think that's a sign of maybe his state of mind feeling a little bit more settled at Real Madrid, and then ready to step into more of a leadership role at international level. Because being a France captain that's heavy going. It's not an easy gig at all by any means. And I feel maybe stepping out of it for a little bit in the long run, like Andy said, it allowed Deschamps to stumble on this unbelievably exciting core that you can, because they're young, right? We were talking before about this, about how Kylian Mbappé is 26 now, but I think the oldest starting outfield player was 27, and the subs that came on in the second leg against Croatia were 19, 19, 22, and 26.
Mm.
And that's an interesting Kylian Mbappé progression, I think, because you wouldn't have him down as a maybe like an ideal captain at international level. He's not. He wouldn't be the first choice in terms of a leader. But I think we've seen sometimes before players like that end up turning into really good captains.
To what extent, though, Andy, does France, this young France team, need Kylian Mbappé to win the World Cup, for example?
Oh, it's huge. And I think it's the difference between them being an attractive team that we like to watch and a potential winner. Absolutely. And do you know what? I think we would be talking about his role and his status in a different way. Look, results affect the way that we talk about everything, inevitably. And he had a few chances at 2-0 in the second leg of the Croatia game that he had this almost personal duel with Livakovic, who had a terrific game, as he often does. And it was, if Kylian Mbappé had scored the goal that had won it in normal time or extra time and stopped it going to penalties, we would be talking about Mbappe's glorious return, in which he showed that this is his team that is going to lead forward to the World Cup, etc., etc. So I'm well aware, and I think we all have to be well aware of how that sort of writes the narrative.
It would be that hip hop kind of, I'm back. I'm back.
Back. Yeah, there's the mic drop, exactly. But he's not, as Ryan was saying, he's not a mic drop kind of guy, is he? And it's interesting that he is, I don't know, as a captain, he's a little bit like Ricky Ponting for Australia, if we're going back 20 years. If you think of that 2005 Ashes series, where the best day that Ponting has on it is not where he's having to outthink England. It's the bit where he has to battle day at Old Trafford and England can't get rid of him. So it's almost as if he gets his head down, ploughs his own little furrow. That is his best way of being a captain. But your idea that you're saying, Ryan, about, that sort of, you don't necessarily have to be an alpha to be a great captain, particularly in a team where you think the key parts are interchangeable. And if you look at the front part of PSG at the moment, how there's no focal point, maybe France could turn into that. And maybe that would be a good thing. If we look at how Dembélé can change positions, if we look at how Barcola can change positions, if we look at how Mbappé can play wide left or he can play centre forward, maybe that idea of a movable feast where you don't have an alpha is fine. And if we're talking about alpha captains, of course, Hugo Lloris was never that, was he? And he's not only the guy who captained France for pretty much all of the Deschamps era, but the most capped captain in France history. So it's almost, we think of him as a weird choice for captain, as you say, but actually maybe it's normal for the Deschamps era to have a guy like that as a captain. I mean, Hugo Lloris was never a shouter, never a screamer. In fact, I remember when he played for Lyon, and they went back to his old club, Nice, and they were 2-0 up in the 90th minute and they conceded a draw. And there was great footage of him coming in the dressing room and all the team coming in the dressing room looking really downcast. And this guy who never really raised his voice, all of a sudden shrieked, "We just shit ourselves out there. What was that?" And you were like, whoa, what happened there? Because it was so unlike Lloris. And, after that, he went back to his normal voice for the entire rest of his career. So I think in terms of it being, we talked about Deschamps being about stability, about doing things the same way, about not taking a massive amount of risks, and the team sort of evolving despite him. Yeah, you're right. I think maybe Mbappé being captain does make good sense in that context.
It's slightly different, but it does remind me a little bit of when Messi got the captaincy at international level, and even at Barcelona, where people were a bit like, not really a shouter, but obviously a great player. And there has been that thing about, I think it's changed maybe in the last 15, 20 years, but should the best player be the captain because they're the best player kind of thing, or one of the best players? But what was really interesting about Messi, and I'm intrigued to see if it happens with Mbappe, is that the transition into being not just someone that you're who is relied upon for being a great player, but an actual captain, was fairly seamless. Surprisingly so, I think, because I think we expect maybe it's just us growing up in England and our captains to be like, right lads, let's go kind of thing. Whereas what was really interesting with Messi, and I think you saw some glimpse of it already with Mbappe's return, is they lead with, this might sound a little bit kind of too, I don't know, out there, but they lead with trust. There's a lot of young players in that French side, and it's similar to when some younger players were coming through at Barcelona, and you'd see Messi trust them. I remember, for example, when Ansu Fati came in, Messi would always give him the ball, and that, I think, is a sign of leadership. And you saw it that maybe he didn't get the goals or the assists on especially in the second leg, but he was involved indirectly for both goals. He got fouled for the Elise free kick, I think, and he was involved in the build up for the second. And so that having that, there's that thing in Andy loves the NBA, right? That great thing about letting the game come to you, don't force it. And if it's a night for putting up 30, 10 and 5, or if it's a night for putting up 12, 2 and 3, is whatever the game needs. And that potential evolution of Kylian Mbappé is something I find particularly interesting, because he's now proved at the club level the main thing was, can he do it at Real Madrid? And he's already shut that down. So I think there must be an element of freedom that comes with having overcome that obstacle.
Having said that, though, is there a question mark over the reception that he got when he returned to the French team, Andy?
Big time. I mean, I don't know really if it was a shock. I don't think it was a shock, because his public popularity has plummeted in the last couple of years in France. And, if you compare him to even Karim Benzema, who went through an enormously high profile court case, it's not favourable. So in terms of that, he's got a lot of making up to do. And it was funny. He gave a press conference where he's always been like quite sort of good at explaining himself. He's a super intelligent guy. But yet he felt the need to come out in his press conference before the first game they played of this two-legged quarter-final in Split and say, look, I realised the last time I was sat in this chair and the last time I was talking as captain of France, I said some stuff that people didn't like at all. I respect that, and let's just make sure those mistakes aren't repeated. And so almost without doing a full mea culpa, I think he acknowledged that, it's going to take time for his relationship with the public to warm up again. But I think you've seen that before with various incarnations of France, where there's been a sort of dislocation between the national team and the crowd, particularly at the Stade de France. And it's taken a while to sort of bring them closer together. Now, for what it's worth, I think that this game and this occasion, the second leg against Croatia, is one of those legs that did it. Even if they didn't get it over the line in normal time or in extra time, quite in the way that they did when everyone was saying when they were 2-0 down before the second game, it's the same situation as the World Cup qualifier for the 2014 World Cup, when they were 2-0 down after the first leg against Ukraine and Kiev, and they had to come back from there. That is still a great night, which Benzema actually was a huge part of, that really made people feel emotion about the French national team again. And there was a bit of that. Obviously, it was not quite the same extent because it wasn't qualifying for the World Cup, and it took them a little bit longer and stuff. But the fact that they battled back from a difficult position with heart, but also with clarity and quality, I think really helps. And of course, the fact that he's the captain that night is definitely a step in the right direction.